Okay, thanks for being here today for our Mental Health Focus on Senior Adults workshop presented here November 16th. This is for the camera. 2019. Myself, teaching elder Matthew Morse, leading the discussion. First slide. Okay, so why are we here? Well, there's a couple of reasons we're here. I'm going to go through these first slides pretty quickly. A lot of it is just why we're here and then some demographic studies. Basically, we have a mental health task force for the Presbytery, if you're not aware. We have recently voted to disband ourselves. We feel like we had done our work over the last couple of years, but with some recommendations, and I'll mention a few of them later on in the presentation, to the Presbytery at large. One of those recommendations was that we would have an opportunity to do routine educational workshops, specifically pre-Presbytery workshops, and this is one of those. We did one on campus ministry and students with mental health concerns at the Brenham Presbytery meeting. If you had a chance to go to that, it was fantastic. We're doing this because we want to help educate ruling and teaching elders so that they have a greater understanding of signs and symptoms and risk factors for mental health and mental health concerns that might present themselves in their congregations and in their communities at large, and also to educate on what are some of the things that are going on within the Presbytery, within the denomination, within other denominations, resources that maybe we can pick up on and share and learn some new ideas for models for mental health ministry in the church. Next slide. Why is this a concern of the church? Well, I go back to my good friend Howard Kleinveld. If you ever had a chance to read some of his pastoral care resources, this is actually an older book from the 70s, but he was probably one of the first forerunners of our more modern movement in talking about mental health ministry and its importance in the church. According to Howard, there are 4 reasons why we should be concerned about mental health in the church. The first, I think we skipped over that slide. Mental health is directly linked to the fundamental purpose of the church because it affects a person's ability to give love and receive love. In working for positive mental health for the improved treatment of personality problems and mental illness in the church is implementing its basic purpose by enhancing the ability of persons to love God and love others, and to be loved and to feel loved by the people they worship alongside. Secondly, spiritual and mental health are inseparably related, he writes. Whatever hurts or heals one's relationship with oneself and others will tend to hurt or heal one's relationship with God, and vice versa. Thirdly, it's a concern for the church because it's always been a concern for the church, even when it's been spoken of in different language, or in different contexts. Mental health is a modern label, he writes, for an ancient concern. It is as ancient a Christian concern as wholeness for people. And fourthly, mental health is a central concern of the church because of the toll it takes on folks if it is absent. Next slide. So our objectives today, and then I want to hear a little bit from y'all before I continue about what are some of the reasons that you guys are here, are hoping to get out of this. We're going to examine the problems and the opportunities for the church in relation to the current status quo, both regarding aging and specifically mental health related issues. Secondly, we will own the biblical mandate for mental health ministry as a priority for the church and its leaders. Third, we will hear about and discuss what kind of ministries are currently taking place. I will mention a few locally and nationally. I have a couple of people who are planted here in the audience that will help that conversation along. And then I will ask y'all at the very end of the presentation, what are some things you've seen? What are some of the things that you're doing in your local parishes? And what are some of the things that we can benefit from in this conversation together? Because I want it to be a conversation once I get through the judge work here. We will fourthly entertain, as I said, discussions of new ideas. And I'll have some ideas and resources that we can take with us. And I will, again, have some handouts to give you at the end to further you along. Next slide. We will now be looking at general population statistics. This is the boring stuff, but this is just to get you an idea that not only is this a central concern, mental health in the church, but mental health specific to ministry with senior adults. As our senior adult population rises in this country, as the percentage of senior adults in the church rises, and as life expectancy expands to where more and more, especially as our baby boomer generation comes up into the elder adult category, is continuing to rise as well. So in 2019, the estimated total population of the United States was 329 million, and of those, 29% were over the age of 55, 13% were over the age of 65. Average life expectancy, as I said, is growing. It's now just over 80 years. That's a little bit less for men, a little bit more for women. The median age of Americans has grown by 10 whole years since just 1970. More of us are living longer. The Houston Metroplex ranks 5th among total population of about 7 million, and that includes all the outlying counties and such. From 2010 to 2017, and this is from a report that the city conducted on aging and population in the city of Houston. They found that senior population in Houston itself, just the city, increased by 30%, just in that 7-year span. And as I mentioned, the senior adult demographic nationally and locally will continue to grow as the largest demographic, if you'd like I can do the whole song and dance about generations here, is growing into where they're going to be living longer, and also they're going to be the more populous setting. So, next slide. There you go. According to the Pew Research Survey in 2016, 75% of Americans consider themselves religious. Now this is going to become important, and I'm going to mention this again in a later slide, because Kleinmel talks about this in his book in the 70s, and the current literature says the same. People who are members or active in worshiping congregations will go to their pastor first with a mental health care concern before they go to another professional. So this is why this is important. 75% of Americans consider themselves religious whether or not they attend worship. As of 2000, and most of them, well, around half of them, consider themselves Protestant. Now that's going to be broken down between evangelical, mainline, etc. As of 2018, PCUSA reported 1.35 million members nationally. In 2017, PCUSA reported an increase of 1.2% of members over the age of 65. That was the only group demographic that increased to just over 40% now of the total membership of the church. That's the largest percentage group in the Presbyterian church of any age group, almost double that amount. And in New Covenant, reflecting those same statistics, and by the way, I got all this off of the PCUSA website, so you can find this for yourself if you'd like. This again from 2017, the most recent numbers that I have. There was an increase of 4.5%, one of two groups to increase, and representing just under 37% of the total membership. So in New Covenant Presbytery alone, 37% of our membership, our claimed membership, are 65 or older. So that's why this is important.
What percentage was that?
37% in New Covenant Presbytery. Mental illness in older adults. According to the World Health Organization, mental disorders affect approximately 15% of the population over the age of 60, which is expected to increase. Among these disorders, anxiety disorders the anxiety disorders and depression are the two leading instances of mental illness in older adults. Anxiety disorders affect 3.8% of the older population. This again from the World Health Organization. The CDC finds that people 55 and older, 20% have some type of mental health concern. Depression affects up to 5% of older adults, but that jumps to around 13.5% for those requiring home health care or who are living in an assisted living facility. Men age 75 and older, and this, I don't know if you know this rate, but this was actually mentioned in when we first put out the Comfort My People mental health statement for the denomination 10, 12 years ago. This was one of the few instances you can find in there where it's specific to older adults. Men age 75 and older have a higher suicide rate than any other age group. There are barriers to adequate care, both in the church and beyond. And so I want to touch on just 3 of them here before we start talking about some of the symptoms and risks and signs of mental health in older adults. Barriers to adequate care. First, it can be difficult, as you can imagine, to pick up on signs of mental illness because at that stage in life, especially those who are in 65 and older, there's going to be other physical concerns, there's going to be life changes, there are going to be things that affect them emotionally, and so sometimes it's hard to separate from that there's something going on that's specific to their mental health. Secondly, older adults are less likely to notify their provider of symptoms. This can be due to the stigma attached to mental health concerns, but it also can be because they do not know what's going on and they can't really explain it adequately. And maybe the doctor or whoever's working with them is not asking the right questions. And that's another reason why that even if someone approaches a mental health professional, it's important that we are looking out as members of their congregation, as pastors, as ruling elders and leaders in the church for what's going on and what might be going on so that we can be part of that conversation. And then finally, as I said, pastors are the most likely candidate for a church member to come to when they're experiencing mental health concerns. So it's important that we all know the signs, the symptoms, the risk factors, and also have an understanding generally of the resources that are available to us. Symptoms of mental illness in the elderly. So some of these are general signs and risk factors that you'll come across regardless of age group, but I've tried to be specific with a few of them as you'll see in the slide after this as to what happens later in life. General forgetfulness is normal. but persistent depression, anxiety, memory loss, or other cognitive issues can be signs of something more serious. Again, we just want to be asking questions. We want to be entering a conversation if there's concerns. Common signs to look for include a marked change in appetite or mood, trouble sleeping or difficulty with sleep, increased feelings of stress, restlessness, short-term recent memory loss. Sometimes that can be a sign of onset dementia. Anger, agitation, increased aggressiveness, unusual behavior or thoughts, difficulty managing finances or tasks involving numbers, problems with grooming or household maintenance, and then persistent digestive issues, pain or headaches not explained by other health problems. Some of the common elderly mental health disorders. Depression is probably the number one. It ranks as the most pervasive among older adults. If untreated, it can lead to other impairments with their functioning. Late onset risk factors. So this is if we're talking about older adults specifically, late onset risk factors include physical illness, recent widowhood, lack of education, diminished functional status, and heavy drinking. Anxiety disorders are the second most prominent after depression. Women are more likely to be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. Now again, these are things that a person could have been diagnosed with in their 20s or 30s, and then now there's even further complications as they get older, or there's a revisiting of a trauma or something that maybe brings something back and enhances that. But specific to older adults, CDC shows that nearly half of older adults with anxiety also experience depression. Symptoms of anxiety disorders include uncontrollable worry, edginess, restlessness, chronic fatigue, poor quality or difficulty with sleep, tense muscles. So you see some of the overlap with depression as well. Related disorders are phobias, panic disorders, social anxiety, and PTSD. And I'm going to go back in a sec and talk specifically about PTSD, but we'll go on with this. Bipolar disorders is another common one. It's marked by unusual mood shifts and occurs equally among women and men. Late onset symptoms, again, include confusion, agitation, hyperactivity, cognitive issues, including memory problems, loss of judgment, or perception. And then eating disorders. Underlying factors in the elderly include changes in taste and smell. And so in other words, they're tasting and smelling things differently, or their medication maybe is affecting their taste and smell, and so they're having a hard time eating. Loss of loved one, depression, attention-seeking behavior. This is an interesting one. So maybe they mentally have decided that they're not receiving the love that we talked about at the very beginning. This is about being able to give and receive love. That affects their mental state to where I'm going to withdraw from eating. Maybe even subconsciously this is happening until someone shows me the attention that I'm lacking. Memory impairment. And signs to watch for: unexplained weight fluctuations, cognitive decline, loss of appetite, chronic dizziness, slow healing. And then here's one we can physically check for: unopened food in the cupboards or in the refrigerator, or excess food that is not being used. I'm going to talk about stress and PTSD because I think this is a unique struggle for older adults, can be at least. It explains why there's a disproportionate number of suicide deaths for men over 70. So what are the unique stress factors that might impact upon the mental health of older adults? Change of life routines, or living routines, or situations. So we're moving out of the house, we're moving into an assisted living facility. We used to come to this Bible study every single Sunday, and we're getting spiritually and emotionally fed by that, and now no one's offered to give us a ride. So maybe we don't get to the Sunday school class. Or now our son and daughter have moved to the other side of the country, and I'm having a hard time functioning, living on my own. I have to move up there. And I've left my church family, I've left my community, I've left everyone I've known to this point. End-of-life decisions. I've put some stuff up here, by the way, you guys can take a look at. Please don't take them. One is Abiding Presence, Living Faithfully, and End-of-Life Decisions. It was put out by A.C. Swap back in 2016, and is a really fantastic resource if you are in conversation with having to talk about those tough decisions about making wills, turning over your finances because you can't handle them anymore. End of life as far as working with medical personnel, your caregiver. This is wonderful stuff. So please check this out, and if you want to order a copy, they've got plenty at the library in Louisville. Probably can also get it on PDF form online, I would imagine. PTSD can be retriggered. later in life, if you've been a victim of abuse earlier in life, or if you've had a traumatic experience earlier in life, and then something happens later on, maybe you have a son or a daughter who's supposed to be taking care of you and they're being abusive. Maybe you're in a facility where abuse is happening. Maybe you're a victim of telephone or internet fraud. All these things can trigger other memories from that enhance the PTSD experienced by senior and older adults. And again, there's a higher likelihood of abuse at later in life because you are. And I want to talk about that later, and I'll mention it, but I'll mention it now that it was surprising to me, although it shouldn't have been. I worked in child advocacy for a while, and then this past year I worked in a mental health facility that had a lot of older adults, and we did senior adult abuse workshops. And it took me getting to that position to find out, I knew that child abuse was a mandatory reporting state. I did not think about the fact that it could be a mandatory state in Texas to report any suspicion of elder abuse. But guess what? It is. And just like with instances of child abuse, you've got a limited window, I think it's 24 hours, to make a report if you suspect there's abuse. And that could just be calling 911. It could be calling your local police department if it's not an emergency situation or the one's in imminent danger. But to know that that's the case if you suspect there's any kind of elder abuse going on in your family or perhaps even a member of your congregation. Mental health is a public health issue. This, again, comes from the CDC, where we read that because mental health is essential to overall health and well-being, it must be recognized and treated in all adults, all Americans, including older adults, with the same urgency as physical health. Adequate social, emotional, and spiritual support is associated with a reduced risk of mental illness, physical illness, and mortality. Sadly, however, according to CDC, adults 65 and older were more likely than adults aged 50 to 64 to report that they had rarely or never received the social and emotional support they needed. And that could be because of isolation, it could be loss of a spouse, it could be just onset of depression or anxiety, but they are not experiencing that network that they need to feel supported, which if we put that next to what we discussed earlier, that the largest minority, or the largest group of folks that worship in our congregations are 65 and older. And yet they're feeling like they have the least support emotionally of any age group. We have a biblical mandate. This is from Grace for the Afflicted, wonderful book by Dr. Matthew Stanford. He is with the Hope and Healing Institute here in Houston. We will be referencing this book a little bit in the presentation, and I will have a handout in regards to some of the programs they offer. But if you haven't had a chance to check out their website, Hope and Healing Institute, it is next door to St. Martin's Episcopal in Houston. It was actually started by some of their financial support. And Matthew Stanford's the CEO there, director, and he wrote this book, Grace for the Afflicted, a clinical and biblical perspective on mental illness. It came out about, the recent issue came out about 2 years ago. It also comes with online, you can look up on their website, a study addendum. I know that Clear Lake Presbyterian Church has a group right now that is reading that book and using the accompanying study guide. I think they may have just wrapped up. But I encourage you to take a look at that if you wouldn't like to use that in your church in a small group setting. He writes, the scriptures are clear. Those advanced in age are to be honored and cared for by the church. Their presence within the fellowship is both a reminder of our faith heritage as well as an opportunity for wisdom of experience to be passed on to the next generation. They are to be protected from those who might take advantage of them. In the Old Testament, the role of the community was to care for the widow, as extolled as a paramount concern. In the Gospels, widows play a role in Jesus' parables about the importance of pursuing justice for the misrepresented, underrepresented, and unheard, and also as a model of the faith. And in Acts, the early church sets aside a special offering to be used to care for the widow and the poor. Charged to care for widows. You can read this up here. This is all in there in the Old Testament. The best, my favorite probably is the one about from Deuteronomy, just because who shows no partiality, accepts no bribes, because it works so well with the parable of the widow in front of the unjust judge. But Isaiah 1:17, saying to the community, Learn to do what is right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. And then Matt Stanford gives this illustration and this story that I was not familiar with, so I was thought it was interesting. But it's from 2 Samuel, and it's someone who had served alongside David for a long, long time. He had been a mentor to David. He had just helped him in battle, and he's 80 years old now. And he declines David's offer to come and live with David in the temple, or in his kingdom, in the palace, and to live out the rest of his life there, citing his age and the fact that he could not distinguish anymore between good and bad. He may, says Stanford, he may have simply been saying he was too old to enjoy the amenities of living in the palace, given that he also mentions he had lost his sense of taste and could not hear as well. So we have an illustration of someone who is aging and who is trying to find their place in the context of the worshiping community, in the context of the kingdom of Israel, in the context of do I have any purpose? Do I have anything I can offer to King David anymore? I run my course. And what we want to say is, well, if that's the average life expectancy now, which is a lot greater than it was back in this time, we need to start thinking about how do we encourage and support and enforce that, yes, older adults have a lot to give in the context of the community, a lot of love to give, and we are trying to give them love in return, because a lot of love to receive as well in a healthy context. Next page. So the church, I'm going to say that the church, in my estimation, there's two reasons why mental health, why we're talking about this. I think the church can do two things. I think the church first can be a pastor. The church is charged for pastoral care for older adults, for seniors, and for their caretakers. Why? Well, we talked about some of the issues. To reduce stress, to reduce anxiety, when possible. We can be educating one another about the triggers and about the signs of mental health concerns in older adults. And then Mary and I had a conversation about this, and I thought it was pretty awesome. Would you like to say something about what we talked about?
We're talking about what churches do or fail to do to ritualize the transitions in later life. When we're working with children, we baptize them. Funeral is a fulfillment of baptism. We commission young people to do all sorts of things. Someone who is moving to go live with their children because they have to, we wave goodbye and don't commission them. So they just sort of walk out. Do all these years mean nothing? We stand around and celebrate a marriage. What happens when one becomes a widow and the widow has to take off that wedding ring all by themselves? You know, where is the church in these life events?
The final that I mentioned is to provide a pastoral arm to the caregiver. I think that's equally important as we have this conversation. My focus today is going to be on mental health in older adults, but the other other side of that coin is there are members of our church, and again, to speak about demographics, I'm coming into what they call the sandwich generation. So I have kids of my own, but then I have parents who are getting up into their, my dad turned 70 this year, so he's not quite, well, I guess he is the older adult now. So my parents are up there now. So we have that conversation about how are we caring for the younger folks in our congregation who have to burn candle at both ends. And then also, there are people in our congregation who are committed to this type of ministry, whether they be deacons, whether they serve on our pastoral care team, whether they be Stevens ministers. Are we doing things as those who aren't part of that to support them and to give them opportunity for respite before they go out and have to do the hard work of providing pastoral care through these life changes and through these sometimes instances of mental illness? The church is an advocate. That's my second point. So the church is a pastor and the church is an advocate. How is the church an advocate? Are we preaching in our liturgy and in our prayers on Sunday morning? Are we afraid to mention the concerns, the mental health concerns, when we say we pray for these folks who have health concerns, and we pray for we say for Sally, who's going into surgery for her arm. We pray for Joe, who just recovered from rehab from a biking accident. We pray for Sue, who is, if she wants us to, do we ask Sue, can we share with the congregation, because you're a member of our family, we want to share this with everybody so they know what's going on. Can we share that you're being relocated into this assisted living facility? Can we share that you are struggling with depression after the passing of Paul, or whatever the situation? So are we treating mental health the same way that we are? And that's a pastoral concern, but it's also an advocacy issue, because we are saying, we are preaching and we are praying and we are worshiping as folks who say mental health is an issue that's a priority in the church. The stigma that surrounds mental health is something that we're here to combat. And the first step is in our worship together. Secondly, are we combating senior abuse by looking and listening for signs of it, and by entertaining educational opportunities such as these, and such as having workshops where maybe we bring people in to talk about how it is a mandatory statute in Texas that you have to report if you suspect there's senior abuse? Are we comfortable, as someone who regularly visits Joe in the nursing home, to come back to our pastor and say, I have a serious concern about, I don't think he's eating, I don't think he's being treated well by the people that are there. His aid seems suspicious. And then, as the pastor, the best course of action is to say, if you're suspecting anything, go ahead and report it, because it's a mandatory reporting state. But you also need to follow up on that and make sure it got reported. Mm-hmm. And then, finally, are we being a voice locally and nationally for parity in healthcare and equal and adequate access for seniors to healthcare, both physical and mental? And what are we doing within our church and to make sure that we're a part of that movement? So what are we doing right now? As I mentioned, comfort my people. Policy statement on serious mental illness with study guide. By the way, depression was one of the 3 that we identified as a serious mental illness. As I said, it's not very specific at all, actually, to older adults, but just mental illness in general. But remember, someone who's 65 at one point was 25, and they may have been diagnosed with a mental health concern then. And as we move further and further away from, hopefully, an era where mental health was not talked about, mental illness was not talked about, I'm presuming that more and more of our folks who are turning 55, 60, 65 now may have been diagnosed earlier in their life and have been able to identify that than someone who turned 55, 60, 65, 30 years ago. So we need to be aware of that and ready to have those conversations about mental health concerns and issues in an older adult that may have been there for 50 years. The Comfort My People, we did that about 10 years ago, 2008.
Yeah.
What are we doing today is, there was this great movement out of Mission Presbytery specifically. Some pastors got together and said, hey, whatever happened to this document? Because half of us didn't even know it was there, even though I believe you can get it at the Resource Center, or again, online PDF form. And they said, well, we want to get together and we want to do a new edition of it, and then we also want to see where we dropped the ball then, what can we bring back now? And also, do we really want to talk just about serious mental health, or can we talk about all mental illness? And so that's the movement that's taking place nationally right now. If you want to go to the website, it's long. But if you can remember that, it's basically just go to the mission page at pcusa.com or .org, then go to ministries, and then eventually you'll find mental health ministry. Or just go to pcusa.org and search mental health. You'll find it.
Or Google search PCUSA mental health.
There you go.
But you're probably better off doing that.
Let's go with that. So what are the immediate priorities of this new group of folks? So basically, a couple of years ago at GA, there was approved a grant, I believe it was $250 that was supposed to, 1,000, that was supposed to go toward mental health ministries, and it was supposed to fund someone who was going to be a mental health associate at Louisville. Her name is Donna Miller. She began her work in May, and she is now like full throttle getting things together for these 3 immediate priorities. First, getting folks signed up for a national, and I'm going to give you the link for this later, getting folks signed up for a national network of clergy and churches for the purpose of sharing and educating and sharing resources, development of a 2nd edition of Comfort My People, and then with updated statistics and updated risk factors and such. And then procurement and distribution of grant money to local presbyteries, and I should say also local congregations, to aid in ongoing local initiatives toward the cause of mental health ministries. In my conversation with Donna in preparing for this, she also directed me, since we were talking specifically about older adults, to the Presbyterian Older Adult Ministry Network, so POAMN.org. There are some wonderful, wonderful resources here. If I had the time and the money, I would have printed up copies for all of you, but I'll have you go online and do it yourself. Basically, there are 2 documents you can find here that will help you develop and plan an ongoing ministry with older adults in your congregation, starting with a survey that you can distribute either among session or among a small study group, or if you want to do the whole congregation, depending on the size of your church and how accurate you think you're going to get a feel on things and getting that back. And what you do then is you get all that information, you gather it, and they will actually work with you, if you wish, or you can do it in-house, to develop a congregation and a community profile, so that some of the questions in the survey are going to be related to who's in your neighborhood, in addition to who's in your congregation. And so they'll help you develop a congregational and community profile about older adults in your congregation, your community, and what their needs are, and how you can best respond to them, and even some ideas for practical ministry aids that you can perform within the congregation. I'm sure that Mary knows a lot about those. I'm sure there are other people in here who work with older. Anybody want to say anything about Older Adult Ministry Network?
They do have an annual conference.
Yeah, we just had our
That has
conference.
just happened.
Yeah, we just had it in Louisville, and I'm glad you're mentioning it, because that is our press, is to work with older adults.
Do you want to add anything to some of the resources here with regard to mental
The
health?
resources are twofold. One is the production people, but they're also people. I mean, you have people of all ages and generations who have gone through or are going through, and there is actually an educational element that you can go through and get a certificate of older adult ministry, which is done now out of, the place in
McCormick.
Atlanta. I just went blank.
Atlanta?
Yeah,
Columbia? Emory?
yeah, Columbia.
Okay.
It's sponsored through Columbia, those courses.
All right. And then again, I wanted to mention one more time that there is some great resources for end-of-life decision-making that would be useful, I think, for pastors and parishioners alike. And interestingly, 2016, so it's pretty new. All right, what are we doing locally? This is where we're going to get into some conversations, because we still got plenty of time. Next slide, please. So the Mental Health Task Force, I mentioned that our work has concluded. Our wonderful chairperson, acknowledge yourself, please. So, and we have other members of the team who are here scattered about as well. We did make a recommendation, and you'll see that in your docket for this meeting, to establish a permanent board that would be under the oversight of your team, I believe, which is the
Congregational Resourcing Team.
Congregational
The
Resourcing
Presbytery.
Team. Once we get that situated, our goal, one of our other recommendations to the Presbytery was that we create a page or a link at the website with resources. So we'll start building a database, basically, of resources related to mental health ministry and points of referral, but specific to New Covenant Presbytery. So what we hope to do is and I'm going to solicit your participation in this if you have nothing else to do in your time. As we form this board, I'd like to know. Please come see me afterwards if you are interested in this. But what we want to do is get a list of resources that if you're in Lufkin, Nacogdoches, these are the places you can go. These are the places that are geographically reasonable for you, or if it's not geographically reasonable, these are where you can do telecommunication counseling, these kind of things. If you're in Brenham, Navasota, if you're in Baytown, if you're in Galveston on the island, or if you're inside Houston, all the Presbytery, if you're in Orange, we want to make sure we have something on this website eventually that will say, okay, here are 3 places that you can go to. Here's where you can go if you need counseling resources. Here you can go if you need, if there's a grief support, a couple of grief support groups in your area. And a lot of this is going to have to come from, organically, from us having conversations and being willing to step forward and say, you know, I already have, you know, I pastor the church in Beaumont, and I'm at St. Andrews, and I already know that we offer this resource, and then we also have a Lutheran church down the street that offers this, and a Roman Catholic church down the street that offers this. So these are the kind of ways that you can help us, so we can get this all up here, so that folks who aren't in this room have somewhere they can go to. And then finally, we want to, like this, facilitate regular educational opportunities focused on specific mental health concerns. Last time in Brenham, we talked about campus ministry and college-age students and mental health concerns. Today, we're talking about older adults. There may be a specific issue. You know, one of the things I'm not diving into today is anything specific to dementia or Alzheimer's or loss of memory. I hope that if you were coming here to hear just about that, I didn't disappoint you. But we could always set up a workshop specific to that and talk about that. Or we could set up one specific to trauma resulting from child abuse, for example, or whatever you're struggling with in your congregation, you let us know. And so I'm going to talk about a couple other things, just local things that people are doing here that I know about just because I live around here. Clear Lake Presbyterian Church is doing a great job with their mental health ministry that they've established. Do you want to talk about Tuesday topics? You're back there?
Oh, okay.
I don't want to pick on Mary the entire time.
I thought Mary came prepared, I didn't. So, no, the Tuesday topics, the first Tuesday of every month, there is a opportunity to attend a workshop related to mental health in some way. I know this fall there were 2 successive months dealing with the whole issue of our adolescent mental health problems. The one in November was grief during the holiday seasons. But they've covered a whole spectrum, and sometimes there's an outside speaker, and sometimes it's led by our Director of Mental Health, which we have a part-time person on staff for that. But Mary, do you want to talk about the gathering place, or?
We participate in Gathering Place, which is a community-wide program from Care Partners Texas. They've just changed their name. It's an opportunity for respite care for people with dementias. Basically a 3.5-hour program that each church does once a month. And in the Clear Lake, Pasadena area in general, there's 8 or 10 programs, so it's possible to go about twice a week if you need to. They exist all over the greater Houston area. There's also powerful tools for caregiver classes. Grief Share, which you can Google Grief Share in your zip code and find out many places. Those are the top ones that come to
Yeah.
mind.
There's one more that you don't have up there. Did you have a question on the gathering?
No, I was gonna add that I had just attended brain camp with Gathering Place.
Mhm.
And that was a wonderful thing. If you ever, it's in Angleton, but it's in Lake Jackson area and this area here. And I don't know if they're gonna have one in Alvin or not, but, you know, Dale, anyway.
It started in Alvin, didn't it?
Yeah, well, in Angleton, yeah. Well, his office is there, but yeah, Brazoria County.
Tell me your name.
Cindy Stowers.
Cindy. Okay, so if you have any questions about that, you go see Cindy after this.
And one more, and this we're doing in partnership with the Lutheran Church. So Sunday morning during the Christian Education Hour this fall, we have had a support group for family members dealing with mental health. And the Lutheran Church has done a support group for people with mental health issues, and now we'll be flipping it after Christmas and offering that at our church, and they'll offer the other one at the Lutheran
Are
Church.
you speaking of Gloria Day?
Gloria Day.
then I'm gonna flip my script. And I'm gonna jump us to the next page, and then I'll come back. But I had a wonderful opportunity to talk with Randy Miller, the pastoral care pastor over at Gloria Day here in Clear Lake. They have 3 campuses, I believe, now, but this is the main campus. Among the other things they offer, they do grief share during the holidays, and they also have an ongoing Parkinson's exercise and support group, which I thought was kind of cool. I said CareNet, it's not called CareNet. Faith Care, what's the
Care
link?
Partner.
Care Partner, ignore that, it's Care Partner. And I've also mentioned Moody Memorial in Galveston because they also, they are in cooperation with them as well. Part of what they do at Gloria Day and at Moody is, and that's a Methodist church, is they have a regular occasion, once or twice a year, where outside organizations, agencies come in and they will set up like a booth and they'll talk about the resources they offer. So it could be a Parkinson's specific medical facility in Houston that comes out, or it could be something that's specific to, it could be someone who works with at a hospice care. They all come in. You've got about 15 or 20 booths. And when I worked at Innovative Alternatives, we focused on the senior abuse workshops. So we had a booth there. And what they do is they have that, and concurrent to this setup where you can just come and go as you please to these booths, they have workshops going on, and they do this about once a year. Talking to Pastor Miller, what he said to me was that the best thing that comes out of it is it's actually an evangelical tool, because what you get is you get folks coming and that aren't members of the church, but saying, do you have anything ongoing like this? And it brings people in. So if you want another reason to be concerned about mental health care, and you want like a really, I don't know, not a great reason, you can grow your church. But to say that of all of this. Oh, and to finish that thought, what he's done is he'll add groups periodically in the church as part of their ongoing ministry because of what he gets from the feedback from people that are participating in this. But I want to say this is a great example of what's happening here in Clear Lake and what can happen in your town. And I really don't want to skip another slide, but eventually we will get there. I'll mention what's at the top of the next slide, and then we'll have to go back. Hogg Foundation, if you're familiar with them, they're out of the University of Texas. They have wonderful resources for mental health. They also have wonderful conferences that are free, but you really, really have to sign up like 5 minutes after they post it, or you're going to get on their waiting list and you never get off of it. Because I've missed 2 of them because of that. They just had one on teen health that was hosted here in Houston. They also had one out in Bastrop, which was specific to mental health care in rural communities, which was fascinating to me. And the reason I mention is because, like what we're hearing about with Clear Lake, working with Gloria Day, working with First Pasadena, working with other churches in the community, what Hogg suggests, especially in rural communities, is that you're going to have to step up and create those networks on your own, and it's going to have to start with partnering with local congregations, regardless of the denomination. And fortunately, I mean, one of my loves of the church, and I'm a cradle Presbyterian, is that we have enough sensibility about our commitment to social justice to where we don't have a problem being the first person usually to step out and greet another congregation and say, hey, are you doing anything? Hey, can we partner with this? So I encourage you, if you're in a small community, or if you feel like you're in a church that's isolated from the Presbytery because you're way outside of Houston, don't let that be a deterrent from creating your own ecumenical networks within your community. Partner with the schools. I guarantee you there's going to be a teacher in your congregation that knows the school psychologist, that knows something about something. Get in there and do the work of community partnering and building, and that's going to be organically what you can do right now. And then once we get these resources thrown up online, you can begin to share those amongst each other. And so I'm very hopeful for what we can do, even if you're not in a larger community like the South Houston, Clear Lake area. I don't have to skip back. Just to say one other thing that I had on the previous slide. Actually, can we skip back? Yeah, thank you. 2 other things I had. First, if you're not familiar with the National Alliance of Mental Illness, get yourself familiar with it. There's a Houston chapter. I'm a member. Just another place to get great resources, and they have regular conferences and workshops that are either very reasonably priced or free. And I'm sure if you wanted to do anything and you couldn't afford it, that the Presbytery would find a way to be able to make that happen, right? All right. So, and they meet around town, but their main office is, where are their main offices? It's not, I know where United Way is downtown. I think they're near there.
Don't remember their offices.
Anyway.
If they're
Um,
online. you can
Look them up
get
online. Yeah. And again, you can get trained at workshops too if you're looking for certification and certain things. And then the final thing I want to mention just is because that's part of one of my handouts I have for you is UCC, the United Church of Christ. This was a real model for us when we met in Louisville back in March to discuss, you've got yours, there you go, to discuss what direction we wanted to go as a denomination, working with mental health, and we wanted to do a networking, and it was because of the people from the United Church of Christ who talked about WISE congregations, and WISE is welcoming,
Welcoming.
inclusive.
Someone asked me that this morning.
You've got it in front of you.
I don't even
Christian
know.
driving.
Jackson Presbytery and congregation to become more welcoming to those living with mental health challenges. But they know, they don't spell that out.
Welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged.
There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It isn't easy to spell.
So there is one WISE congregation in Houston that signed on to the commitment. There is about a little bit under 100, I think, nationally at this point, but they're growing. And your commitment is you have to go to your session and you, well, in their case, they're a church board, and you sign, you write your own, you own your own commitment. You write your own commitment and pledge. This is how I'm going to commit to being a WISE congregation. And I don't know if Presbytery and Church USA is going to come up with some kooky acronym that works better for us, but that's in the works. But that's going to be, that's going to be one of the handouts I give you. I'm going to give you Plymouth UCC out in Springs sample, so you can see what they did and how they did that and how they owned it. But even if PCUSA is behind on the 8 ball on this, you're more than welcome to adopt your own local one and say, this is how our church is committed to mental health ministry in the congregation and the community. Next page. So we talked about networking with the other churches. Know your referral options. I said we're working on this website, I promise. But also, if you are familiar with 211, it's United Way. If you have a situation, it's not a 911 emergency, but it's someone has a mental health concern, you need to get in touch with somebody, 211 will get you there. So know that number, especially if you're anywhere close to United Way, but it's all by telephone anyway. There also is KNBJ. I always get confused with one in Austin. What's the Christian radio station? KSBJ. They have a prayer line that's 24 hours. You can always call them, and they have people available. I know this because Innovative Alternatives here in Clear Lake is the licensed counselors that will pick up the phone, and they will talk to anybody. And it's just if you have somebody in crisis and they need to talk to somebody and they can't get to somebody, have them call the radio hotline, and they'll do that for them. Also, and I'll be handing these out as well, the Hope and Healing Institute here in Houston, they offer free counseling services. They also do teleconference, or telecounseling now. So they've got a TV and then they talk to you through your computer. I don't get the whole thing, it's new to me, but it works apparently. So if you're off in an area where you can't get access to be there. But there's some business cards over there, and it basically just says Hope and Healing, and on the other side, here's the number you call. So if somebody needs counseling services face-to-face or over the computer, they can get that from there as well. Models for ministry, we talked about some of this. So next steps, final steps, we got 10 minutes. What are y'all doing? Anything you guys are doing in your congregations you'd like to share with the group?
Well, we are in Brazoria, we have, rural community, and we work together with Actions, which runs elder hostels, and we have all week in the morning a safe place for elderly to come to. And I have been approached with pastoral concerns in that context, but it's I can only say I'm amazed not more churches do something like that, because it actually is on our side a very little volunteer commitment. So I very much recommend doing something like that. Create a safe place where regularly the elderly can come to and just have a good time socializing.
Yes, St. Philip's is a mission partner.
St. Philip.
Yeah, or St. Philip. One of our mission partners is Amazing Place, which just ended a series on caregivers.
Oh,
and
that's
how to
yours.
deal with caregiving and dementia, and it was free. So it's about a 5-week seminar. So hopefully we'll run it again in the spring. But they also love to go out and do it somewhere else. Let's do this.
Group from St. Louis.
No, it's Amazing Places, its own 501(c)(3). It's a daycare for Alzheimer's. It is inside the loop, so it may not be accessible to some, and you do have to get a car there. It does cost, but it is one of the top dementia care, early dementia care in the country.
We have a lady in our congregation who is going to be a point person to get them to
Oh,
come
good.
out to Livingston and do it for maybe not only our church, but other churches that in the community.
It's an
Plus,
excellent.
I'm doing a regular Sunday morning class on emotional needs, mental health needs in our community, and beginning with various clinical issues like depression, anxiety, etc. But also, we are partnering with the Episcopal Church in town in doing seminars for what some in this room, I'm sure, are aware is called Mental Health First Aid. It's a national program. So those are the kinds of things we're involved in.
If you're on the northwest side of town, Kendra Oglesby, who is the mental health ministry professional at Clear Lake that was mentioned earlier, had mentioned this to me. She went last year. I believe it's in February, March, so look on your calendar, but it's in the Woodlands. It's at the Baptist Church, at the University of Baptist, or no?
I'm not sure what
Well, you might, do you know the one that does the Belly of the Well? Are you familiar with the Belly of the Well?
I'm familiar, but I'm coming up with a blank.
If you look in the Belly of the Well, Woodlands, it'll come up. But it's a free day-long presentation, sharing of resources and talking about mental health in the church. This will be the third time they've done it. So take a look. If you Google that, right? Google our friend, right? Anybody else want to share anything that they're up to? Yes.
I think it behooves us as churches to open our buildings to any of the 12-step groups that want to be there if your church is open. It isn't a shame anymore to say, I had cancer. I mean, you're not dead, you're not crossed off. And if you say, I am recovering from alcoholism, or I am the wife of an alcoholic, or the family of an alcoholic, that should not be a shame. But there is that stigma that you don't want, as Presbyterians, we don't want to say we're less than perfect. So.
I thought we had to say they were.
Part of the theology.
But Gail, you give us a great point. I did not spend any time really on it, which is, I can say this because she's been deceased for 10 years. I think there's a statute of limitations on that. My grandmother was addicted to painkillers. She had 2 knee surgeries over the course of 6 months, and her husband passed away 3 months before that. So she started abusing opioids, I guess is what they are. And so that could be a unique situation that's triggered by anxiety and depression for senior adults who have access to this medicines and are not being monitored or looked out for because there's no one doing it. So I think that's a relevant issue, especially in later life.
We have found in dealing with the Alzheimer's respite program, you may end up with more people outside your church than members of your church participating. Part of the reason for that is, do you want to come to your own church admitting as a family or as a person that you're dealing with Alzheimer's? It's much easier to go to another church.
Laura.
And so do not be surprised.
Well, I know we host a gathering, but we also host a support group for the caregivers with the gathering, and I would say that a large percentage of our participants are not church members, and we have some unofficial participants in the volunteers with the gathering place that really should be receiving care, but are they volunteering?
I've got some good minds in this room. I'm going to bounce a situation that I'm dealing with right now about all of this.
Okay.
And some of you may be able to chime in. I have a couple, wonderful couple, both of them really very supportive of the church and have been. But since he has developed, and I'm not sure what the diagnosis is going to be, but there certainly is a dementia problem there. And there's some issues, and it has caused them both to pull back from the church and publicly. She is a nurse, and so has this thing about really going to be the caregiver there. I've gotten a couple of calls from him in the middle of the night. Might have been a butt dial thing or whatever, but saying, I really need to talk to you. And then it gets cut off. And so I'm kind of wearing both a pastoral hat and a reporter hat, because I'm almost wanting to make a wellness check and make sure all is going well. There's a lot of isolations, and I'm not sure where to start with that. I've got some things, and I don't know, maybe there's someone else here who has dealt with that, or maybe you have.
I'm gonna let you folks handle the pastoral end of that while I try to get these handouts going since we're running on time. But I do want to say real fast before we do answer your question about that.
Sure.
As far as reporting, because I didn't mention this earlier, if it's a wellness check, if it's whatever, you don't have to give your name when you call.
Right.
And you can even do it online. And so, I mean, they ask for an email, so that might break your anonymity. But if you call local law enforcement and say, I need a wellness check, you do not have to give your name, and they are obligated to follow up on it. Even if it's just
Well, I'd like to do a pastoral wellness check first.
Well, I would recommend that too, yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we all need
Right.
to realize
No,
how
I
much
don't wanna go that far
isolation
yet.
enters into all of this. And it's very important for the
And
church
APS, yes, and APS.
to keep isolation from happening.
Speak up. Can you say that again?
I said, I think isolation is one of the bigger problems in all of mental health, and it's up to the church to help keep isolation from happening.
Final two slides. So here's some resources. So here's the great thing. Not only do I not know if you guys have sign-up sheets, well, you do. Okay, so if you have a sign-up sheet and you want me to send you all of it, I'll send you all of it. If you want just the resources, I'll send you the resources. If you want to wait till it goes online, this will all be on the New Covenant Presbytery website soon. This whole presentation, including all the side conversation. And anyone who gave their name can now be targeted for additional resources. Let's keep this conversation going. I do have some handouts. These are the cards I talked about. This is from Hope and Healing. If you want to carry just a few in your wallet or your purse or whatever, and if you're in a grocery store line and you get into a conversation with someone and they have a concern, you can hand these to them, and it's great. I also have. So if you want these, I will leave them up on the podium here. These are copies of their program guide for this year. You can also get this online. They have so many different opportunities to come together for workshops. They're free workshops, and some of them deal actually with drafting wills, end-of-life issues, Alzheimer's, so specific to older adult concerns. But there's other ones as well, like youth and stress and things like that. So if you want these, I will leave them up here as well. What I'll do is I'll move this to the center here. These you can pass around. I only have 30 of them, so one each church maybe. So if you'll take care of that. And that is from the American Psychological Association. If you do not get a copy, you can go to psychology.com. And when you get there, actually it's right here. Letter's right here. Oh well, maybe I don't have it up here. But when you get there, psychology.com, just search faith leaders. And it'll give you links to two things. It'll give you links to, is that it? Did I say psychology? Psychiatry. There it is, psychiatry.org. Mental Health, a guide for faith leaders. It's about 25 pages long. It's amazingly wonderful. What I'm handing you is the cheat sheet that you can also get there, which is two-sided and summarized.
Thank you.
And then this is the sample of the Plymouth United Congregational Church covenant they put together for becoming a wise congregation, just as an example. And like I said, I'll move this here. All the other resources, if you're interested in looking at some of them, just don't take them. I've got these books here. A couple of them are pretty brand new. Grace and the Afflicted, the recent edition. Resurrecting the Person, and then Mental Health in the Church. And this Mental Health in the Church book is great because it's specific to anxiety and ADHD and PTSD in all ages. And I hope that was helpful, everyone. Thank you so much for being here.